All right. All right, guys. Welcome. Give me a sec. Wait a minute. I think I'm actually early. I think I'm early. But I'm gonna go anyway. Let's see. I think I am actually ahead of schedule. 2, 9. Oh no, I'm late. I think I was supposed to be, and I was supposed to be an hour before this. All right, guys. Look, sorry about that. I'm trying to calculate like when I said I'd be back for this first classics. So what we're doing actually is, as I said earlier, because I just decided that, you know what, I'm going to come down here each evening and talk about films, classic movies. First movie is going to be, as you can see on the board, Back to the Future. Just give me a sec. Let me just get myself situated here. Oh my goodness. And guys, I think this is actually a good selection to begin with. It's a good selection to begin with because it's actually a film that's in my top. It's in my top 3. Because some people might not know what my top 3 is. I'm not even going to put it out there because that's confidential information. Okay, but I do have a top 3, and Back to the Future 1, which is the movie we're going to be discussing today, is in that. Give me a sec. Oh boy. Just going to take a little bit of, just give people a bit of time to get in the room, because I know that some guys were waiting. Just give this a little bit of time, guys. Sorting out a couple of things here. See what we can do. Yeah. All right. All right, yeah. So look, Back to the Future, okay? Probably, not even probably, the greatest time travel film of all time, hands down. It is actually the definitive time travel movie. The definitive time travel movie. I mean, I don't think that there's any movie, when you talk about time travel, this is the film you think of. And in fact, so much so that it's hard for me to even think, what are the time travel films? Hot Tub Time Machine, Time Traveler's Wife. You see what I'm saying? Like it's so definitive that it's very, very difficult to name anything else, right? Just trying to get something up here on the board on my okay, later. Let's do this. What's going on here? Boom, boom, boom. Yada yada. What's all this? Get that out there. All right, guys. So, quick synopsis of this movie. Just quick synopsis before I go into like why this movie is so amazing. Got this guy Marty McFly. Okay, he knows this guy Doc Brown. Doc Brown is this crazy scientist. Marty McFly is his high school student. Yeah. Hill Valley is where he lives. His father George and Lorraine are his parents. Okay, McFly's. And he has like a brother and a sister and everything, but they're not even really that important to the story. Cut a long story short, like they get into this scenario where Marty McFly is with Doc Brown, who stole some plutonium from the Libyans. Listen, I mean, it was very racist. I mean, you know, but at this point in history, you know, they were allowed to do this in the 80s. So the Libyans now are these terrorists, right? And then they come and then they try to get the doc, and then there's this altercation, and Marty McFly, in trying to escape from them, gets into the DeLorean because the Doc Brown stole the plutonium so he could use it to power his crazy idea of building a time machine with this device called the flux capacitor. Okay, the flux capacitor is like this thing that was the key to time travel that Doc Brown was able to figure out when he slipped and fell and hit his head on a toilet. Okay, that's what you must know. Then Marty McFly gets into this into the DeLorean, and he's trying to like outrun, outdrive, the Libyans, and then he just, he's trying to go as fast as he can to get away from them, not really remembering that the doctor told him that, listen, if you hit 88 miles per hour, it ignites the flux capacitor, and then you go through time. And he set it to 1985, right? What am I saying? 1955, and he puts his foot on the pedal, boom, he's back in time, he's back in Hill Valley in 1955, and the movie begins. So that's like the beginning of the movie. And then the movie is basically about him trying to get back to the future. Now, as I said, this film is just a stellar movie. I mean, it's an incredible film. I think one of the first things, so I'm going to just go through like some factors about why this film is so good. I think the first thing is obviously, look, the premise itself is very interesting and accessible, right? So the premise itself, being you're going into this thing without these soft, see, before Back to the Future, whenever you would think of a time travel thing, it was some scientist and some highbrow, blah, blah, and Star Trek. Those were the kinds of things that had dealt with time travel. High, lofty, of course a lofty idea, but the sort of things were things like Star Trek that had dealt with those sorts of ideas of time, and bending time. So the thing that was really interesting and cool about Back to the Future was they just pulled this thing down to like the most basic elements. And the protagonist is extremely accessible. And to compound it, it's essentially a comedy. It's a dramedy. Let's call it a dramedy, right? It's got jokes throughout the entire thing. It's very easy watching, so no matter who you are, whether you're into the scientific fields or whatever, and so on and so forth, or not, Back to the Future is extremely accessible, because on a basic level, it's very entertaining. And you have to remember that you see Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox was a big star at this point. He was like the young, not even up and coming, he was like probably the most popular young actor in Hollywood at that specific time, because this was during like the Family Ties era. He was like really, really, really famous, like really popular. I mean, and it's difficult to convey because obviously if you're not of that era, you wouldn't know. Because I remember, because I was young, and I remember Michael J. Fox in the mid to late 80s was a very big deal. He was like the equivalent of, I'm trying to think of, there really isn't any actor now who, you know what I mean? It's like Robert Pattinson during Twilight. I don't know, like something of that ilk, right? He was just very, very popular, right? So him being in this film, this was his big break. And I think Eric Stoltz was supposed to be in the movie first, and they actually shot a section, like a part of the movie, like I think the first third or whatever, I don't know, of the film with him. And then the director, Robert Zemeckis, decided that, this guy wasn't right for the movie. You can actually see some of those, you can actually see some of the, not even the screen test, some scenes that are actually in Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz in it instead of Marty McFly. And I think there's even a video on YouTube where it compares the scene in the diner between the both of them, where they meet George McFly, played by Crispin Glover, for the first time, and you see his face come like, let me do this properly. You see that scene, right? You've got that scene in like comparison between the two actors, right? And what happened is that the director just said, listen, it's not working. And they went and got Michael J. Fox. He fit the role perfectly, as we've all seen. and the rest is history. So that's the first thing about this movie that you've got to know is really, really appropriate. It's like, look, the film was very, very well cast because you've got all the other actors, you know, who are playing the roles, like Christopher Lloyd playing what do they call his name, Brown, Leah Thompson, I think it was Lorraine, Crispin Glover, as I just mentioned. And listen, there's a guy that doesn't get enough mention, and it's Thomas F. Wilson. I'm going to talk about this guy in all the this one, because Back to the Future 3 is not going to be in this classics series, but Back to the Future 1 and 2. Listen, it's in part 2 that Thomas F. Wilson really he really showed you what this guy was about. This guy, let's talk about all three. He plays so many different characters. He plays different versions of himself. Old Biff, young Biff, and regular Biff, right? Like middle-aged whatever Biff, right? So he plays those three eras of Biff, right? Then he plays corrupted Biff, which is a version of the middle-aged Biff in part 2. Then he plays, it's just remarkable. Like, and the thing about it is that it's how incredibly distinct the different Biffs are, is what is amazing about this guy's performance. It is one of the most amazing comedic, dramatic performances that you would ever see. And nobody talks about it because it's in Back to the Future. But for such a young actor, he was such a young, like, the guy that you're talking about is Biff, you know, the person that you would see in 1955. Like, that is how old he was. You know, like Michael J. Fox as well. Like, what he looked like is that. So this is not like some seasoned older actor but this guy's performance across the board, when he's playing the old Biff, it feels like this is a fully grown, messed up man. And you just don't realize that this is like a 20-something-year-old guy playing this role. Amazing. So I want to give a shout out to Thomas F. Wilson, who doesn't get enough praise. Yeah, let me put this. Yeah, man, he's a classic villain. Everyone growing up knew a Biff. Yeah, but I you know what, listen, Infinities, man, I just feel like Thomas F. Wilson doesn't get his props. He don't get talked about. Like, only people who are like really big fans of Back to the Future really talk about this guy, you know, like really highlight how top quality his performance was across the board. It was flawless to the point that there was nothing, not one single one. The thing is, like, Michael J. Fox's characters, some of them were just like, you laugh because it's funny, but you're not thinking that it's a great performance. Like when he played his mother, for example, or his sister, even when he played the older version of Marty McFly, you know, in part 2, it was just funny. It's like, okay, look, this is Michael J. Fox being the older version of himself. Thomas F. Wilson's performance as middle-aged Biff, and especially as old Biff, who was conniving and all, was and is absolutely excellent. Absolutely excellent. Let me see, Valvena's in here. Let's see what he's saying. Alien, Back to the Future. There's something in those films. Blood, that's magic. Films, Blood, that's magic. What is it? And how do you judge where Zemeckis' career went? Zemeckis' career went up from here. Like, you have to remember, like, just because it's very hard. There are not many Spielberg. In fact, there isn't another Spielberg. Only Spielberg was able to go from Jaws and then start making greater films. Like, most people who would make Jaws would never match the success or critical acclaim of that movie. Only Spielberg, in all my knowledge, is the only director that went from an incredibly well-received movie to continuously rise for like 20, just continuously make film after film after film that was surpassing the films that he made before. There's not a lot of I mean, the only other person you can name is, like, you then talk about the stalwarts like Kubrick, Hitchcock, you know, Sidney Lumet, Scorsese, James Cameron. Like you're going into those echelons, right? So Zemeckis is not in that, you know, those echelons. So therefore, I feel like this guy's career is really, really good. Like if you just look at the movies that he's made and everything he's been involved in, Robert Zemeckis has done great. Like it's just like, listen, you're not going to make another Back to the Future. Do you know what I'm saying? If let's take some time and actually even look at Robert Zemeckis' filmography. Let's look at his filmography, okay? And let's really just look at this. Okay, so we're going to let's start from Back to the Future. Okay, so Back to the Future, right? So he then made Amazing Stories. I remember Amazing Stories. It was just, you know, it was a TV thing. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, guys? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Then obviously the other Back to the Future movies. Death Becomes Her is a classic, whatever you say. Forrest Gump. Contact. What Lies Beneath. Castaway. Polar Express. Okay. Beowulf. Flight. Then Allied. Guys, he's got a couple of classics in there, you know, and that was after Back to the Future. And he did Back to the Future 2 as well. I don't rate 3 at all, but part 2 was amazing, you know, one of the best sequels of all time. So I think Robert Zemeckis is very, very well for himself personally. Anyway, let's get back to the game. Back to the Future. Okay, so you got all these actors, right? Thomas Wilson came in here, did this. Christopher Lloyd, career best, in my opinion. Like, he defined the crazy Nazi professor. No pun intended. Okay, pun intended, I suppose. He defined that, you know, the thing that we'd seen in cartoons and we've seen in comics. He came into this film, and since Back to the Future, whenever you think of the crazy, wacky professor, Doc Brown is the idea you think of. He's the idea you think of, you know? So that in and of itself was, in itself, Doc Brown was an iconic performance and character in the movie. So anybody watching Back to listen, I think everybody must have seen Back to the Future. So even if I'm talking about it now, it's about rewatching something just to reappreciate. And for any kids, and I always say this, like, look, if you're under 20, I suppose, you might not have seen Back to the Future. You're in for a treat, because it's amazing. In fact, I actually think of kids who are young, right? The amount of amazing films that are available for young to watch is shocking. They could spend the next 5 years watching amazing films from back in the day that they don't think they should be watching because they're focused on all this Marvel stuff. But I'm like, do you guys realize how many amazingly incredible films existed pre-2000? You know? Anyway, then you look at the special effects. Special effects in this movie are great. You know, I mean, obviously they're not cutting edge compared to today, but we're cutting edge at the time. And I think, you know, obviously because Zemeckis was a Spielberg guy, Spielberg definitely, his influence on this thing is all over it. Same with Goonies as well. You know, you can just feel the sensibility of it. But the special effects were great, you know, I mean, and just so many little, it's just the iconic elements of the special effects, like the idea of making a time machine out of a DeLorean, and the DeLorean being a very unusual vehicle. Like, it was a very unusual, you know, even the ways the doors opened, and the car was never successful. It was never that popular a vehicle. You know, it wasn't like this car that everybody had, and it wasn't, you know. And I think the quirkiness of it and the fact that it was a cult car is what really helped Zemeckis use that vehicle as the centerpiece for the time machine device. I'm putting the flux capacitor in the back. Now, listen, man, look, as far as the movie goes as an overall, you know, it was an incredibly, or is an incredibly fun film. Incredibly fun. From the very beginning, it's just, I mean, I don't know whether to call it edge of your seats, but something is always happening. He's always you know, of like, that's what you see. Listen, when you watch that film, you just see how to make a film exciting. It's that every moment of Back to the Future, Marty McFly is trying to figure out what to do. He's always like, I've got to do, and it's like just constant, constant, constant. So you can't be bored. The movie doesn't let you be bored. Like, you can't be bored. It's just constantly things happening. So that's on your first watch. When you then go back and watch this movie again, you see all the little nuances. You catch a lot of jokes that you might have missed before. You catch a whole bunch of things that are very important to the narrative that you may not have been able to focus on when you were first watching it the first time. You know, like all the little jokes that I was talking about. But another factor of this film, I think, that really works for me is, I mean, obviously the music as well is a big deal. The music really helped a lot. Let me see what's going on here. People's attention span. Okay, let's just put this up. Pierre and Mess said, people's attention spans have gotten shorter, so a lot of kids would not appreciate 80s classics or even 90s. I don't know about that. You know, I agree that yes, people's attention spans have gotten shorter because, you know, the industry has messed guys around. Like, you know, they've been creating silly films, you know, just to be able to make as many films as you can, sell as many tickets as you can with minimal efforts, you know, where you just turn it into a business rather than art with skill and talent. We know this. But I believe humans are humans. And if you show a human quality enough, they will begin to absorb it. I feel like showing kids Back to the Future, yes, there's a percentage of them that will not have the patience because of how they've been conditioned to appreciate the movie. But I believe a big percentage of those kids will appreciate Back to the Future. And it would change the way that they see movies that are coming out now. If they were made to watch a lot of these older films. That is the reason why I'm not really down with all this remake rubbish. I hate that. Why are you remaking Scarface? That's like the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. How on earth do you remake? The movie is still good right now. You could watch Scarface today. It's still good today. There is nothing about it that makes me think, oh my goodness, I wish they need to really update this movie. Even the hokey effects and things that happen are part of the charm of Scarface. So yeah, man, look, I think kids would appreciate it. Let's see what Valvena is saying here. Has got to be for sure a mentor character as great as Yoda, probably better than Yoda, because the Back to the Future trilogy was solid, unlike prequels. Doc, I'd say equal to Yoda. Who else is there aside from those two? Mr. Miyagi, but Karate Kid, which I probably have to put on my list of films to do. Mr. Miyagi, Morpheus is one of the top. He's in the top 5 mentors of all time. Ducard was rubbish. I think that whole Ducard thing, and Ra's al Ghul was supposed to be Ken Watanabe. So when they tried to do the Ducard as Ra's al Ghul, that's rubbish. It wasn't good, you know. So anyway, but that's another one. So yeah, no, look, if I was saying comparisons to Doc Brown, I mean, I think the greatest mentors have been Mr. Miyagi is probably one of the top ones, and Morpheus. Yeah, Mr. Miyagi and Morpheus. I think the funny thing is about mentors. Isn't it funny how the mentor is always some ethnic person? These great mentors teaching some white guy how to be the best he can be, or how to discover his inner strength. And that white guy ends up becoming the best ever thing that has ever existed in that whatever craft it is. That's always funny, because I remember Karate Kid. I'm like, wait a minute, this guy, David LaRusso? LaRusso was actually, you know, it was actually quite funny though. Anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand. I lost my train. Yes, so that's that. Let me get this off the street. Yeah, so that's the thing. Let's get another question up here. Man, these films today are the same. Cars like a Ford off the assembly line. Those older films have all have a different, well out together engine. the details. Yes, I concur with that. That is the big difference. Originality. And people were not afraid to fail back in the day because Hollywood wasn't as much of a machine, a business machine, as it became in the 80s and 90s. Really, it was the 80s and 90s that created the situation that we're in today because of the crazy levels of success that films suddenly had from nowhere. Because if you think about it, in the 70s and 60s, films were not making en masse the kind of money that they started making post Jaws. Steven Spielberg is the guy that really came out and started, him and George Lucas anyway, really came out and started defining the concept that movies could be making hundreds of millions, like they just off one film. So once that happened, the industry started looking for formulas. It's like, oh my goodness, look, it's not about how good the movie is. Maybe there's a way to synthesize success. Because back then in the 70s and 60s, they were focused on the movie needs to be good to make money. So we need to make good movies that are interesting and unique. That was what they believed was, and the irony is that, yes, that is the truth. That's how you get sustained success, and how your industry thrives and grows is by doing things that way, not by doing things where it's just business. But anyway, that is what happened. And definitely, yes, we now have really an assembly line situation, let's see what else we got here in the comments. Conshota, Ferris Bueller. Let's see, you got Ferris Bueller versus Back to the Future. How similar are those two in a way, and which takes it? How can you can't compare Ferris Bueller to Back to the Future. That is one of the greatest things that has ever been made in movies. You know what I'm saying? It's not even a comparison. It's like comparing Star Wars to, or Empire Strikes Back to Flash Gordon or something, Flash Gordon is good. I need to add Flash Gordon to the list as well. Flash Gordon and Karate Kid remind me. But it's like, you can't compare that. Back to the Future is it's a whole other level. Yes, I mean, look, I think put yourself in their shoes. Okay, let's see this. Put yourself in their shoes. Are there any family movies from the 60s and 50s that you would enjoy? Oh, yes. Oh my goodness. When I was young, I was watching things like Forbidden Planets, 10 Commandments, Quo Vadis, Jesus of Nazareth, Cleopatra, Samson and Delilah, Rope, Psycho, what do they call it? North by Northwest, Dog Day Afternoon, Godfather. Oh my, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Few Dollars More. That's where I got when I was young, 100% parents were showing children, because we were still in the era where we thought films had to be good and people didn't disrespect classics. How do you think I watched all of those films? Casablanca, South Pacific. I was watching King and I, Oklahoma, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Goodness me, I mean, my goodness, I was watching everything. Everything. From the 5th all the way back. The first Scarface. I mean, that was like a weird movie. What do they call it? Third Man. What's that movie with Humphrey Bogart? The Crest. Something the Falcon, Maltese Falcon. Was that with Humphrey Bogart? Tell me, Humphrey Bogart was in the Maltese Falcon, wasn't he? Or am I messed up here? Thomas Crown Affair. But that was actually a bit of a newer movie, but anyway. So yeah, man, I mean, my goodness, there's a big difference. Like today's era, people aren't watching movies from 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. The kids now, they don't even know what was coming out in the 90s. If it's not got a sequel. The only things that they know about are the movies that have sequels now. They're like, oh yeah, they're bringing out a 4th Matrix. And Matrix is so ubiquitous that everybody knows Matrix. But they're like, oh yeah, there's another Matrix. So a kid who's 15, who wasn't didn't exist when the first Matrix came out. And barely, no, it didn't even exist when the third Matrix came out. Those sorts of people, like, they're only going to know about the Matrix in reference to the people who are making movies now. So because they see John Wick, and they know that, and they like Keanu Reeves and John Wick, they know that Keanu Reeves, one of his big movies is a movie called The Matrix. And also because The Matrix keeps getting reference in pop culture. That is the way that people, know these things. So yeah, man, I mean, like, I think it's a difference of cultures. It's a difference of attitudes. It's a difference of, perspectives. It's a difference of temperament, difference of education. But, that's what this series is for. That's what this Talkback, classics, that's what we're going to be doing, is that we're going to be educating folks. We're going to be shining a light and a beacon on the classics, the films that people need to see or revisit. And like I said, I was doing this on my Instagram, but I'm like, listen, man, it's Talkback. I might as well just do it on Talkback. We're all locked it away, so we can be doing this nightly. I think I screwed up the times completely. I think I'm late now, but this time kind of works for me. So I think I'll do it at this time, going forward. Let's see, what's this? What does he say? What director today could make a proper Back to the Future remake? Nobody. I don't want to see a Back to the Future remake. Nobody can, because it's of its time. The era we're in now is just so inappropriate for a Back to the Future movie. Like you said, people have ADD. So even if you made a great Back to the Future movie now, it wouldn't mean anything because nobody cares about anything anymore. We live in an era where people think they are superstars. People who don't do anything, just because you have an Instagram account and you have a TikTok account, you have a Twitter account, and you have a Facebook account, and you can do a little jig with your bot. Guys think they're superstars, and you have followers. You try and talk to a person that has 5 million followers or 3 million followers, a random person who could, you're like, what do you actually do? I've got 3 million followers. That's the world we're in. Clout chase united. That's what we're in now. So when you're in a clout chase united scenario, who the hell cares about a movie of the quality of Back to the Future being remade? The key for today's world is that if people have the wherewithal, is that they go back to watch that movie. You're not going to make it. For this generation, it's like, I don't know what a version of Back to the Future would need to be to capture the attention of this generation. I have no idea what it would need to be. That being said, I would say this, and I think, see, all these protests that are going on, I'm very impressed with these youngsters, because I think this is important for them, because it's giving them something serious to connect to. And hopefully when this quarantine and everything is over and we go back to real life, it will have changed the path of some of their minds, whereby what I'm saying about the quality of films or the quality of cinema might actually make more sense to give them a way in, to actually appreciate quality things. Let's see what he's saying here. Speaking of audiences today, would those older directors make a dent in the masses today, or is a whole other breed of director not necessary to show people with talents on scene? Escalation, as they say. Yes, that's basically what I'm saying. Yes. Directors of that quality today are just what you need to be a success today is so different to what was required. Back then, you just had to be really good and make good films. Making a good film now doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. Actually having talent and ability now, I'm making, it's like, honestly, I think it's now easier to be a niche director today than it probably was back in the day. Because everybody's trying, like I said, everybody's trying to get their own corner. So the potential to actually get an audience for your little quirky thing you do because of all the avenues to distribution that now exist, that you can just distribute. There is no reason for you to be begging for a distribution deal now because there's so many channels to get your movie out. So for that reason, I feel, you know, you definitely have a more fertile landscape for quirky, unusual directors to get their own little corner, you know, and get their own little audience to be able to do what they need to do. So yeah, man, you know, I mean, I'll be down with that. Anyway, so think about Back to the Future, right? So the movie for me, and I think it's very obvious when you watch it, it wasn't made to have a sequel. The ending is the way that a lot of 80s movies ended, where the adventures continue, you know, they're going to go on more adventures. That was just a nice way of ending films, and they didn't have a culture of making sequels yet. So the way that Back to the Future ended, it wasn't, you know, when they said, where we're going, you know, it's your parents and where we're going, they don't need roads. I don't think that they necessarily knew that they were definitely going to be making, I don't think that they even thought about like they were going to make a sequel. 2 and 3 were made together. Like once the success of part 1, and they did part 2, and I think that they just did part 2 and 3 together because they knew that they were going to make a second and third film. And boy, do I dislike Back to the Future 3. I mean, I think in my entire life, I've watched Back to the Future 3 from beginning to end once. The first time I saw it, and the film ended, and I was like, "Oh my God, what the hell is this?" So and I can talk about that now because I'm not including that in the series. I do not know what the hell happened with that third movie. Like, I was like, "What is this?" You know, didn't enjoy it at all. Part 2 is incredible. It's just because of nostalgia that I give it to part 1. I say part 1 is better, but because I feel like part 2 doesn't work if you don't have the first film. Like it only works because of part 1. Take part 1 away and part 2 is just like, okay, you know, it's like fun, but it does. The resonance of Back to the Future 2 is really strongly based on the groundwork did in part 1. Okay, let's see. How brilliant is the title, and doesn't it sell itself with the title alone? And did Terminator come after it? I think it did right. It's time travel movie, Back to the Future series, or Terminator. Which do you take? Okay. The title is great. Terminator 1 came out before Back to the Future 1. Terminator 1 came out in 1984 or 85. 84. I think it came out just before Back to the Future, a year before Back to the Future. Back to the Future, when I think of time travel movies, okay, you know what? That's a debatable one. It's probably Terminator. It's probably Terminator. If I was thinking about what is the definitive time travel movie, it's tough, man, because when you say time travel to me, the first thing I think of is Back to the Future. But Terminator is pretty seminal as well in that field, you know. I think it did right. Time travel, Back to the Future series or time. What time travel movie? Back to the Future series? Terminator series is a joke. Like, come on, man. Like, the first 2 are ridiculously good. So if the movies ended at part 2, then I might have to give it to Terminator. You know what I'm saying? Like if that was where it stopped, I'll be like, woof, man. I mean, that's a tough one because you know what the funny thing is? It's the same situation because I feel like Back to the Future 1 and part 2 are the movies. Part 3 I didn't like at all. But the thing is, Back to the Future 3 is way better than Terminator 3 in its respective franchise, right? So it's way better. So if I'm taking the trilogy, I'd have to go with Back to the Future trilogy over the Terminator trilogy. If I'm going with the duopoly, I have to go with the Terminator duel over Back to the Future because listen, man, T2 is the greatest action film ever made. It's the greatest action film. Like, there's nothing better than Terminator 2 when it comes to action. Like, it is the greatest action film. So it's one of those weird ones where it's like, Back to the Future 2 is incredible, but your sequel is up against the best sequel that, like, T2 is the best sequel. That's the only sequel that's comparable is Godfather Part 2. And I would argue T2, in a comparison to the first movie, is better than Godfather Part 2 was to Godfather Part 1. Because Godfather Part 1 was already an incredible classic film. So it was actually an achievement that, what's it called? Godfather Part 2 was even able to do what it did and like come out and be like, wow, man, this is actually better than Part 1. T2 trounced T1. Other people were like, no, it didn't. I'm like, listen, man, Terminator 2 is outrageously good. It's outrageous. It's actually outrageous. Like, every time I watch that film, I'm like, this is outrageous. It's such a unique movie. Like, you're watching this film and you've never seen anything like this before. That's the part of it that's so crazy. It's like, you, at the point of when you're watching T2 for the first time, you're like, and when it came out in 91 or whenever, you've never seen a movie like this before. And the special effects to this day are still good. Let's see what's being said here. The Thing, Scarface, and the Maltese Falcon, and A Fistful of Dollars prove that remakes can be good or even better than the originals. You're conflagrating remakes with, well, okay, Fistful of, okay, fine. It is a remake of, what was that Japanese? Well, I can't remember what the name of the Japanese movie was. Fine, you know, but The Thing, yeah. Okay, let me qualify these. The Thing and Scarface were remakes of movies that when those originals were made, The Thing and the original Scarface, the technology of cinema was so rudimentary that you were always going to be better than the originals. Like, those films came out like at the beginning of Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? In black and white. Like, it was just, where they didn't, the special effects were rubbish, and like the acting was stilted. So it was always, that's easy. Maltese Falcon, I'm like, you know, okay, fine, you know. Same thing, really. I mean, Fistful of Dollars is a bit different because I actually feel like that wasn't even, it's more of a reimagining than a remake. It's more of a reimagining. So I wouldn't be so hasty with this, because the quality of those remakes, the era that they were getting made in, you've got to actually look at the originals and they were getting made in and say that, why is this movie so much better? Like, The Thing, look, it's John Carpenter and his prime, you know, so to be honest, I mean, you're talking about a guy I mean, you know, John Carpenter has made some crazily good movies. And he's a very unique filmmaker, like very unique. Nobody makes films like that. Like, they're very raw movies. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's a very unique filmmaker. So it's difficult to compare those, I would say. Okay. Let's see what else is here. Alien is greater than Aliens. I agree. We'll be talking about Aliens later in the series, you know, but I agree with that. Let's see what you're saying here. T2 is one of a kind, myth, sci-fi, action, depth, blockbuster, humor, drama, poignancy, female lead, Arnie's role, all the best parts of Cameron at his peak. Actually incredibly, insanely good. Yes, agreed with that. Alien is greater than Aliens. I agree with you there as well. A lot of people disagree with me. And I've been saying this for time. I'm like, Alien is the best of the two. The only thing is that the reason, whenever you say better, people just think you're calling the other movie bad. I'm like, no. Aliens is an amazing film. Just that Alien is better. Alien is, like I said, I mean, you see, what we're talking about, the epitome movies here. These are movies that are like the best of the absolute best. The best of the absolute best. So it's difficult to even start arguing what Alien, I mean, like, you know, it's hard to say. For me, yes, it is better. If I'm picking out of the two, Alien. You know, let me see what we've got here. People talk about Tarantino today, but Zemeckis wrote Back to the Future, Cameron wrote Terminator and Rambo First Blood. Oliver Stone co-wrote Scarface. These directors could write. Yep, they could. But I don't think that anybody is as good as Quentin Tarantino as a combination. Tarantino is the best writer-director that there has been so far. He's too consistent. And it's like, I'm not a Tarantino fan at all. All these films that they keep, oh, Pulp Fiction, like, I don't like Pulp Fiction. Foxy Brown is okay. What do they call it? What was the other one he made? Death Proof or whichever one I'm like, it was all right. What's the other Tarantino movies? I'm blanking. But the point the movie that really got me was Hateful Eight. Like, honestly, I saw that movie. Oh yeah, Inglourious Bastards he made. I'm like, okay, you know. Hateful Eight. I was like, I ate my words. I was like, all right, Hateful Eight, okay. This film I don't know how he did it. And I think that was what proved to me. I was like, you know what, this guy's good. You know, I mean, and honestly, I would say like overall, even though I'm not a big fan of those other movies, as for personal taste reasons, anybody who looks at those films and doesn't say they're good films is crazy. Me not liking it doesn't mean that Pulp Fiction is bad. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not for me. So I can look at that and be like, listen, man, a guy who wrote and directed this, and wrote and directed Reservoir Dogs, and wrote and directed Foxy Brown, and wrote and directed Hateful Eight, and wrote and directed Inglourious Bastard, and wrote and directed Django Unchained, even though I don't even like that film at all. Still, the technique involved is what I'm looking at. Once upon a time in Hollywood, it's the technique involved. There hasn't been a filmmaker who is a writer and director that has hit those levels of quality consistently ever. Nobody. So he is the best 1-2 guy of those two. He's not the best director and he's not the best writer. You see what I'm saying? But as a combination, I don't know who, I can't think of anybody who's better than that. Yes, you can pull out people who wrote and directed. So for example, Sixth Sense is better as a 1-2 thing than anything Tarantino has made. As an overall, when you just think of the amount of sophistication required to create the Sixth Sense, the directing, the writing, and how the script it's like an unbelievable achievement, right? But Shyamalan doesn't do that consistently. Like, he did it once. You know, he did it one time. Let me see what favorite zone good film is. Anyway, that's it, guys. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this. I mean, this is I don't know how much more to recommend this film to you, or to where else to even analyze this. I mean, you know, it speaks for itself. The finale is fantastic as well. Obviously, I don't want to give spoilers to people who amazingly might not have seen this, but the finale to Back to the Future is great. It's like thrilling, edge of your seats, you know, against the clock, which is in line with the theme of the movie. It's like, will they do this in time? They only have so many seconds, so many minutes, seconds, whatever. It's really, really excellent. And yeah, man. So, I mean, let me see what's next on the docket. Let me see what the next movie is going to be. I have my little list here. Let's see what we got next, guys. Rambo 2. Going to be doing Rambo 2 tomorrow. First Blood Part 2. Haven't talked about that film in a long time. Wow, man. That is one hell of a movie. Like, anyway, I won't say too much about that, so I'll save that for tomorrow. All right, guys. So yeah, stay tuned. You know, I'll be back with the next Talkback Classics, Rambo 2, tomorrow. All right, guys. Later.